Esse vídeo está chegando até você graças aos apoiadores do canal. Considere apoiar nosso projeto no Patreon ou no Padrim. Os links estão na descrição do vídeo e no comentário fixado.
We had a cyber attack that was occurring using a software program from a company called SolarWinds, and they have this FireEye, this cybersecurity system. Well, the system was developed for our own intelligence agencies to look at other people around the world, other countries, other governments. It's this Five Eyes thing. It's the same story that we've talked about with your listeners over and over again. The intelligence agency apparatus from countries around the world is being turned back on ourselves. It's a Frankenstein monster. What was created to protect America and protect Western governments and countries is actually being used against the very people that created it. It is literally a Frankenstein monster. And the people involved are these globalists that want to literally take control of the world. It's the continuation of the coup going back to Kennedy and before. President Kennedy was trying to dismantle this machine, this CIA operation, including connections to the Air Force. And it was being fought back against by people in the military and the intelligence community because they, again, it's this globalist thing. A lot of people don't understand, we talk about China right now. I've done numerous broadcasts talking about how China, when it opened up and the wall came down, and for some of the folks that are younger and aren't quite as long in the tooth as some of the rest of us, prior to President Nixon, China was a closed society for several decades, and you really couldn't go in and out of China readily. There was no business. They were isolated to the world. And an incident happened that was virtually unknown even now in the world.
Yep. And buddy, it's funny you should bring that up because, you and I have a mutual friend of ours in New York. And I kind of gave him the hint of what you're about to say. And I said, you know what, I'd rather have Juan explain it to you. But if you want to just drop the hint real quick, here on the infamous event that occurred so many, many, many decades ago, which was basically the world is where it is today because of that event. Go ahead, Juan.
It is, yeah. It was the sinking of K-129, a Russian submarine. The Russian submarine on 3/11. March 11th, an important number, 3/11, 1968, tried to launch a nuclear missile against Hawaii, against Pearl Harbor, a second Pearl Harbor. And when the sub was, there was radiation in the water. It was detected a few hundred miles away. Actually, it wasn't that far. It was about just under 100 miles away, by a research vessel. Then they went back and tracked it down and actually had a submarine that was based in Hawaii that was designed to work under the water, kind of like a voyage to the bottom of the sea scenario where the sub could open up a bay inside while it was submerged, 100-200 feet down, and then drop a drone essentially on a cable and photograph or map the seafloor. And they found where the submarine was in 17,000 feet of water. And then the most expensive intelligence gathering operation in American history, one of the most expensive and complicated projects ever done by mankind, was this job to pick this submarine up with a big claw and lift it into a ship that where it could be examined and torn apart, etc. And that was the Jennifer Project, the Clementine Project, and that was the Glomar Explorer. Howard Hughes was the figurehead for that operation. It was actually run by CIA. And it was the most expensive operation CIA had ever undertaken by far, far, far. In fact, the complexity of that operation was such that it, arguably would have been easier to go to Mars than to go 17,000 feet down in the ocean and pick this whole submarine up. It's a pretty stunning thing. So Why am I talking about that? Because with that data from that submarine, and in fact, Chinese agents were allowed to be present during some of that recovery process so that they could see that this had happened. What was going on was a false flag. We were involved in Vietnam at the time. There was this whole huge drama across the world. Russia and China were at each other's throats. They'd been friends a few years earlier. And so Russia had sold China. Russia was more advanced than China in some of these weapons, including the ability to fire missiles from a submarine. And so Russia had sold two what are called Gulf, GOLF, 1 submarines to China. And Russia had proceeded to build what were called the Gulf 2 submarines. And so what happened was a Gulf 1 submarine could fire from the surface from about just under 400 miles away from its target. And in those days, you didn't have almost anything in the way of satellites, and you certainly didn't have software to triangulate your location on satellites. And so what they did was they would get on the surface of the ocean, and then they would triangulate their position by listening to huge broadcast locations, 1,000 miles away, hundreds of miles away. And they could tell where they were at on the surface of the earth, and that would help them to set their missile to go a particular trajectory to hit what they wanted to hit. It was not nearly as precise as it is today. Well, when that submarine, which was commandeered out of Russia, it's supposedly a deep state operation in Russia, rogue thing, a bunch of the reality is these were globalists running Russia like this globalist crowd is that's captured America, this captured operation in various parts of the world. And they're doing false flags to con the world into going along with their war is a racket. War is a way for these people to control us as a planet, literally, by constantly putting us against each other. And then they rake in all these profits. They look at us as sheep to be herded around and controlled for their purposes. And so at the end of the day, creating the best enemy money can buy, this was just another racket. So after the submarine was recovered, the Chinese see it. They are told, look, Russia tried to commit a false flag against you, tried to make it look like China had attacked America, and it was a Gulf 1 submarine because it was being fired from 385 miles north of Honolulu. The missile misfired in the tube. The submarine sank. Here's the proof. You Chinese, if you don't get closer to the West, if you don't open up, if you don't let us work together, then what's going to happen is we might end up having to destroy China in a war because we make a mistake. So China bought the ruse, and they opened up. And the first emissary was a business emissary. We didn't even have an ambassador to China in those days. The first business emissary to China was George H.W. Bush. So, and when he comes back from his trip to China to set up business relations with China, what happens? He becomes director of CIA.
There you go.
This is a very influential person from a very influential family. Who else is leading the attack there to get China into our camp? Remember the name Henry Kissinger. Right. Henry Kissinger, who just 2 weeks ago was taken off of a Department of Defense advisory council, right? That where he's been in play for decades and decades. Why? Henry Kissinger's beginning, Council of Foreign Relation, a Rockefeller operation, the whole UN thing. UN was really a creation of the Rockefeller crowd. Back in the 60s and 70s, coming up on Reagan coming into office, one of Reagan's big things as he came into office was that he was not going to use as many Council of Foreign Relations people on his cabinet. And that became a winning strategy where the American people were so fed up with this Rockefeller crowd, these Rockefeller Republicans, all these agencies run by disciples of the Rockefeller mentality. And David Rockefeller himself, he does this famous speech at one point in his life, near the end of his life, and he brags about the fact some people, accuse me of being a globalist, and that's a bad thing. He says, well, I'm not ashamed to be called a globalist. That's what has to happen. The world needs to be run globally by these unelected oligarchs. George H.W. Bush, famously 11 years before 9/11, on September 11th, 1990, does his speech talking about the new world order needing to be done. I want people to understand that China has a deep state that's been running it, just like we have a deep state that's been controlling America. That's really what this fight is all about. All of the enemies of President Trump, all of those enemies are really almost universally from this Rockefeller camp.
Right.
If you look, here in the United States, you have this incredible, huge component of Rockefeller operation. Bill Clinton. I've said this before. I'm not saying anything new to your audience. Bill Clinton is a hidden Rockefeller. His dad is Winthrop Rockefeller. The whole myth, the story of being conceived from one date with Blythe, that's just a lie. Bill Clinton vacations with the Rockefeller family up in Colorado every year. Has for decades. Why? Because he's a Rockefeller. He's the bastard child of Winthrop Rockefeller. You wouldn't elect a Nelson Rockefeller to be president. Even what had gone on with Nixon when Agnew was out, and then Rockefeller comes in and becomes VP. They wanted to kick Nixon out, and then he was going to become president. Nixon said, not a chance. And they ended up with Ford coming in to be president. Nixon was very honorable in some of these things. That's, almost sacrilege to say that. Well, if you understand the rest of the story behind the scenes, I think Nixon did his part to stop something that he had been part of and realized it was something actually horrible. And so he did some things to go against the cabal. So we end up at this moment in time where we've been played by deep state operators, globalists across the globe. I'm not kissing up to Russia, not kissing up to Putin and all that. That's a controlled, captured operation too. If you remember back when we took down the economy of Russia, Russia collapsed. We won World War III. Right. We're in the lead-in moments to World War IV right now. World War IV isn't necessarily kinetic at this point in time. Kinetic meaning physical contact, bang, people hitting each other. We aren't quite there yet, but we're so close to being in a kinetic engagement. We're in this cyber realm right now. And is it really a war with China, or is it a war with the deep state? And I would contend that it's actually a war with these globalists using nation states to attack us. The people of China, wonderful folks. There's people in China fighting their deep state just like we are here. We talk with them regularly. There's people in Russia. I had calls inside literally the presidential compound in Russia in the last several days. And reminders repeatedly, hey, we don't want war with America. And they don't. They are sweating bullets that we get this under control ourselves and stop this push towards war that's being pushed by globalist business people, globalist-minded politicians and crowds to force us into an actual physical engagement that right now is only digital.
Olá pessoal, tudo bem? Então eu tô passando para desejar um feliz ano novo para todos vocês, que Deus abençoe e ilumine a sua vida e que os seus sonhos se realizem. Muito obrigado pelo apoio, pelas mensagens, pelo engajamento em ambas as plataformas, tanto no YouTube quanto no Twitter. E um agradecimento especial aqui às pessoas que apoiam financeiramente o meu trabalho, o meu projeto, o nosso projeto, pois sem vocês nada disso aqui seria possível, seria impossível de acontecer.
O Warlei, a Sandra, a Majestade, o Thiago, o Antônio, o Arthur, o Carlo, a Erika, o Rubens, o Caio, o Flavio, o Gustavo, o Vunho, a Spanish.vaz, o Eduardo, a Renata, o João, o Henrique, o Leonardo, a Iracema, o Eduardo Maluf, o Anderson, o Daniel, o Morandi, a Atena, o Wesley e o grande Pablo.
Muito obrigado por tudo, boas festas, até mais.